So good afternoon, everyone. Today we have Joe Nester talking for our Lunch and Learn. Joe's an independent crop consultant in Northwest Ohio and owns Nester Ag LLC. Joe also provides conservation outreach consulting for many partners in agriculture in the Western Lake Erie Basin, including Ohio Natural Resource Conservation Service and soil and water districts. So in this installment of our Lunch and Learn series, Joe is going to discuss some cover cropping and its challenges while also providing helpful advice to support that type of cropping system. So Joe said he'd like to take questions as we go, so feel free to stop us whenever, but I'll just be here to help moderate. And I guess with that being said, Joe, I'll turn it right over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Brent. So I've been independent consultant for 33 years now, and prior to that ran a large retail fertilizer plant. So 47 years of making a lot of mistakes and learning from them. That's how we learn today's from the field. It's not something you can pick up a book and say, well, this is exactly how to do it. And there's many ways to do it successfully. But I guess what I'm really fond of cover crops. When I started working with them, I had a grower that had been experienced for quite many years, and we hit it off, and he kind of helped me through some things. And so for 18 or 19 years now, no-till and cover crop on my farm, and Scott Mavis farms for me, and it's been contagious with him. He's moved it on to other farms and fields, and seeing great results from it. I think he thought when I went cover crops and no-till, well, you're going to be last planted, but not the case. And I do have drainage, but the soil health and the soil structure really promotes getting on that ground earlier without doing damage. So my farm's usually one of the first ones Scott gets planted, both corn and beans. So it's worked out well. I guess just a couple things here. I jotted some notes down, and like Brent said, if there's questions, go ahead and bring them up. And also afterwards, if there's any questions and you want to call, I may not have the answer, but I know some good people that I could dig in with and get you the answers. So, the biology is so important. And I spent in the retail fertilizer business 16 years managing just the chemical side, not really the physical or the biological side. And the chemistry is real easy to manage when you're just talking about, let's put on NP and K and maybe a few minors, but there's a lot more that comes into it, because your physical and I'm going to talk about water stable aggregates. So let me qualify that a little bit. Most of our consulting is in Northwest Ohio, South Central Michigan, and Northeast Indiana. And most of that would be the clay-based soils. Most of it is in the Lake Erie watershed, the Maumee primarily. And so those are heavy clay soils. And that's where that water stable aggregate management really has to come to the forefront, because otherwise it's going to get very tough on you. Stephanie, before you joined here, I said my beans are still hanging in there, and the beans all around me planted the same day that are not cover crop and conventional till rotation for the corn, they've given up, and the whole fields are yellow. Same variety of beans, same maturity. So it's about the water. The one thing that we're both blessed and cursed with on these heavy clay soils is water, and usually it's too much. If you get to these dry times, the heavy ground holds more than the low exchange soils. But back to that water stable aggregates, I would challenge guys to take a look at their calcium and magnesium relationship on their soil test if you have clay-based soils. Now, if you have single digit exchange soils and they're primarily sand and silt and drainage is not your problem, then you can't manage the calcium and mag the way I'm going to tell you here. More than likely, you'll need to add magnesium to those low exchange soils. But if you have, and depending on your soil test, where it comes from, they're not all created equal. But if you've got 16, 17% base saturation of magnesium in a clay soil and above, you're going to have challenges. And it's going to be a couple major things. Water infiltration rate is going to be much poorer, and the water stable aggregates, because excess magnesium in those clay soils will peptize the clay particles and put it into solution. And that's why I know Stephanie's farm down there, and after a rain, you can go see it, and there's clean water leaves that farm. It's clear. It looks like drinking water. Her husband Scott does a great job, great conservationist, but you have other fields right beside those fields, and when we get that 2-inch rain, and it peptizes the clay, it goes into suspension, and soil leaves the farm, and nutrients leave the farm, and soil may not leave the farm, but it moves within the profile, and it will be a detriment to water infiltration rates. So that would be the number one thing I'd challenge guys to do is these cover crops are a crop. They're not a miracle fix all. And usually I'll see guys, we're going to try cover crops, and they'll put it on their worst fields. I will get called later, and I walk out there and we got planting issues following the cover crop, and it laid wet, and tough stand establishment. And I can look right at it and say, yeah, you got a magnesium problem here, don't you? And then they show me the soil test, and yes, they do. So there's definitely a difference between calcium and magnesium and the way they react with the soil from clay soils to sand-based soils. We use both products, calcium and mag, to balance pH, push hydrogen off the soil colloid, but they react very different with clay. And some great documentation to take a look at there would be Dr. Warren Dick's work from the Ohio State University. And he did a lot of work with gypsum and phosphorus, and we did the legwork on those projects. So maybe look up Dr. Warren's work there, because you can, if you have inherently high magnesium levels, we can fix that. You can leach it with gypsum and get back to that proper water infiltration situation, which will help all your crops and your cover crops too. So I want to make sure we touch that. And
No, I
again,
have a,
yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry, not to cut you off. I guess I have a question. So you're meant, I have a couple questions. I guess you're talking about calcium magnesium ratios on clayish soil. So are you talking like a 20 or higher CEC, and then I guess as your base saturation for that ratio, are you looking at like a 70% calcium in
Good,
a
good
good.
questions, Brent. And I would start, at 12, 13, 14 base saturation or exchange capacities. You could get some water infiltration challenges if you let that mag get too high. Now the 20s, we get into those CCs, that's a no-brainer. You've got to adjust that, or you're going to drown your crop and have trouble with root development and root dieback and several things. But so I've been since I've been an independent consultant, Brookside Laboratories is where all our tests go through, and we shoot for 70% base saturation on calcium and 15 as a max on mag and below. Now you can't avoid magnesium forever on those soils, so you got to watch. There is a point that you'll hit where you're going to need some magnesium nutrition, and I never want to fall below about 150 pounds an acre of magnesium, because you'll have a deficiency in any soil with that. So yeah, and if you got different, for instance, let's talk A&L labs. The way they don't count sodium and other bases in their calculation for exchange capacity. So you're allowed a bigger piece of that pie with both calcium and mag. So there you might be, you could go to maybe 17 or 18% magnesium and not really be at that peptizing stage where you explode that clay into solution. So that kind of answer that. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not all, so I hate to throw those numbers out in front of a big crowd, because everybody's going to say that's where I got to be. Well, it depends on your test.
So you're
But
doing
there
that
is a relationship.
right. So you're using that or doing some of that using gypsum, and then are you also doing like variable rate lime with calcium magnesium ratios?
For sure. With, the lime variable rate to me is more important than variable rate P and K. And it's because it sets the foundation. It's the beginning level of how available your nutrients are going to be, and even it'll carry clear down to microbial proliferation. So keep variable rate lime. And so we've got fields where we have heavy clay soils in one area, and since they're bigger fields today, there's a ridge in it. So we have recommendations that go out where you have to put high calcium lime on portions of the field, and maybe on the sand ridges you got to go in there with mag lime, or you're going to be at a magnesium deficiency on those low exchanges. But yeah, the variable rate lime is extremely important. We've taken all these small fields, maybe an 80 used to be 6 fields, and now it's 2 80s together and it's a 160. We got a lot of soil type variation. Anything else on that?
Nope, not for me. Thank you.
Okay. So talk a little bit about what to use, and this will get to a philosophy I have. I think most of the cover crops we deal with are probably cereal rye. Now we get some blends, and some guys like to do that for diversity, and I'm a great fan of that. One thing that I think might get overlooked a little bit is I really like barley mixed with cereal rye. The barley seed itself is not as hard as a cereal rye. And Mark, we just had my corn flowing on last week, and I'm half cereal rye and half barley. And if I get a small rain coming up here Friday night, like they're saying, that will probably be enough to germ and get started on the barley. Maybe not on the cereal rye. The barley doesn't get as tall, a little bit more diversity that you're putting in there with your live roots. I think that's one thing I didn't mention. If you don't use cover crops, you got live roots to feed your biology 4.5 to 5 months a year. That's not enough. We can't move the mark forward with 4.5, 5 months live growing roots. But you use a cover crop, now you're talking 9+ months of readily available food for that biology. So, and it's going to hold nutrients. It's great water quality. But I do like that mix of barley. So maybe just a little tip there. Two quite different seeds. So I do like that. But we'll get to this is where I think the biggest mistake is made that turns guys back on cover crop for the upcoming year. They let it go too long. And there's nothing in the book anywhere that says you got to have 6-foot tall cover crop and plant into it for it to really help your soil health, hold your nutrients, and deliver to you the best opportunity for optimum crop the next year. Planting is number one. Planting and stand establishment. So when I got guys starting out, especially if you're gonna plant corn following cover crops, I have a philosophy that's when in doubt, take it out. And Scott that farms for me has a Jeep and an ATV sprayer along with his Hagee. And I'm sure they hate running that Jeep and ATV sprayer compared to that Hagee. However, the first week of April, we can roll in there and take out the cover crop before we plant corn, hopefully 10 to 14 days later. I'd like to take that out that much ahead, and it'll start melting down and desecrate. And it doesn't get to the reproductive stage where we blow that carbon nitrogen ratio out of the water. And now my cover crop is eating up my nitrogen, which I so dearly need for that corn crop. And you can set it back. And I have guys say, well, I hate to take it out because it's going to lay wet. Have never seen that. Never seen that. I think when Brett and I were together a month ago, I talked about Jim Berline when he used to plant his plots at Hoytville in the fall. He would plant oats and then just let them winter kill. And the reason Jim did that was because the oats, even though they're dead, still will wick some moisture out the next year, and he could plant it when he couldn't if he didn't have a cover on there. And he was taking the easy way out, the winter kill, because Jim had a lot of area to cover. But I think, so I want to dispel that fear that if we kill it early, it's going to lay wet. I don't see that. I just don't see it. The other thing is, if you let it get big, obviously it's using a lot more water. And if you get into a dry situation, that's something that I think insurance companies feared sometime back in the beginning. But when in doubt, take it out. You get your feet wet, you've been doing it for years, go ahead and let one get a little farther along if you want. But I don't see what the big advantage is. I think guys think, well, we're going to build organic matter quick, and probably not the case if it turns to that reproductive stage. And now our carbon nitrogen ratio is going to take a year and a half to digest and turn it back. Because by that time I got another cover crop in there that's contributing. So that's probably the mistake I see, or the challenge that I see, guys. Let it get too big. Now on beans, on the other hand, they're with their taproot system, don't have the challenges that corn has with that fibrous root system and trying to get it established. So you can let the beans go a little farther, which the cover crops going to beans. We will do that, but when in doubt, take it out. You may have a 3-week period out there with a dead cover crop before you get in there, but it's done its job. It's held its nutrients, fed the biology over the non-crop months, and you're ready to go. So I think the next thing, and then we can go to some questions, is herbicides, your herbicide program. And not only your herbicide program, but when did it go on? And there's a lot of good charts out there now where you can get plant back, but most of your herbicides are going to be an 18-month plant back to any other crop other than what they've done their research on, mostly corn, beans, and wheat. But when in doubt, they're not going to do the work on that for their label. So it's an 18-month deal, which is a deal breaker for cover crops. So that's probably stretching that window somewhat. But you can really hurt yourself with some of these even post materials that you go in and then say 6 weeks later, boy, I hope that's all gone because I'm planting my cover crop, and more than likely it won't be. But there's some good choices out there that you can make that will not carry over and sting that cover crop if you have time and water. So this year we planted late, a lot of beans planted in June, and not much water. So we could be looking at some herbicide issues out there. And I'm sure you guys have seen that, especially on the ends where you might have a little double up, or I think a good indicator is the edge of the field, where a lot of times it's a half rate on that very edge because of no overlap. And if your cover crop looks really good around the edge but nowhere else, well, we're stinging it. And I, that's probably, so we got timing of planting. We have the calcium mag relationship on clay soils. When in doubt, take it out, and let's give the cover crop a chance with a herbicide program that supports it. And a good cover crop stand is a great weed suppressor right there. So that's mostly me talking, Brent. So if anybody's got any questions, be happy to see if I think I covered the big items here.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe about what he talked about? I guess I do have one. So you'd mentioned the herbicide programs with the effect on cover crop germination. Are there certain herbicides that you're seeing that have more of an effect on the germ versus others, like any residual products that might be having an issue, or is it just like kind of Liberty and List kind of thing that's still carrying over into the fall?
No, it'd be mostly the residuals, and even I've seen some wheat herbicides where guys are going with wheat, that the sulfonylurea type of materials. Those are going to need some water, and if you look at to break down and time, if you look, and I know Penn State used to have like the best chart out there, but I think there's some others put together now. Purdue might have one. I'm sure Ohio State's got one that you need to study that when you're picking that. Usually, over the past 40 years, we want a stout herbicide. Guys are gun shy on that. Well, we got a lot of tools out there now, and so that residual, I do like some residual, but boy, if it goes out late in June, beware. We're asking a lot, and then our timeliness is a challenge, and that's why Mark's on here, because Mark's the tool to get that cover crop out there when our crop's still standing, because it's not always easy to get in with a spreader or a drill or something behind the crop.
So with that effect on the cover crop germination, are you seeing like a certain percent reduction on
And stunting, yeah, and stunting. And so when you stunt that cover crop, you're also stunting the root system, is what we want. We see what's above the ground, but we want that root system for the soil quality, and that's where the stunting happens. And you can do some digs, if you see the edge of a field where the cover crop looks good and then it's suppressed out in it, you can do some digs there. You'll be amazed at the difference in the root mass of those cover crops. If we got herbicide carryover, they're going to be spindly. The hair roots, which are doing all the pickup, are dying back. You can dig with a shovel and see that. But there's been a lot of work done now where I think we've got some tools you can use and keep your weeds down but not hurt your cover crop.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Joe? Okay. I guess I do have one more, Joe. We have a couple more minutes here. So with cover crops and trying to, I guess if you're planting cover crops, you're trying to suppress weeds. Are there any, so specifically in my area, it's water hemp, mare's tail, and giant rag. Are there any certain mixes or any type of cover crop that might help with some of those small seeded broadleaves specifically?
When you get into water hemp and palmer and those things, they're so prolific seed producers. The guy's got to stay right on his toes with that. And I've seen some good cover crop fields where that ends up showing up, and I don't think it's coming in the cover crop. I think we have a real challenge with birds spreading the seed, and find them around wires and poles on the end of the field. So and it only takes one plant, or two plants. Now you got 200 to 400,000 seeds produced per plant. I haven't, there may be some work on that, Brent, but I haven't seen that we're going to suppress those big ticket weed problems.
Yeah.
Overall, yes, but you probably change your spectrum of weeds a little bit when you go to cover crops, but plants growing in the shade and not being real competitive, you can have a severe impact on it. But those weeds you mentioned are very competitive, and they'll shoot up above and go to seed.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's why I asked. I was curious if you'd seen any sort of like allelopathic effect with certain cover crops on anything like that.
Not so far on those big ones. What we would say is our problem now and future problem weeds. Haven't seen that.
Yep. Great. Thank you. Any other questions for Joe? We got a couple more minutes here if we need them.
I'm sure there's guys in the field and getting ready. I've seen combines running yesterday. I think we're a couple weeks ahead easily. Somehow we caught up time here. I mean, even the trees and matured, the wheat as early as it matured. So we are ahead of schedule, but now when you turn the water off, it really accelerates it. And I think guys that thought they were going to be cutting beans the first week of October are starting to cut some now.